Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 214. Clyde Whittle. Thomas Whittle, usually known as Clyde, was the youngest in the family. He was born on the 25th of August 1897 in Hobart, Tasmania. He was the child of Henry William Whittle and Catherine Teresa Sullivan, who'd married on the 4th of February 1878 in Brighton, Tasmania. There were 10 children in the family. In the Hobart Tasmanian News on the 21st of March 1902, it announces the death of their father, Henry Whittle. Sudden death of a corporation overseer. Henry Whittle, aged 50 years, died suddenly in bed at his residence this morning. At 6:15 a.m, he spoke to his wife and did not complain of illness. His daughter went to call him at 10 minutes to 7 and discovered that he was deceased. About a fortnight ago, the deceased complained of a pain in the heart, but since then it was believed that this state of health was good. He had been in the employ of the Hobart Corporation as an overseer of roads for a period of 12 years. An inquest was held by the city coroner. And the next day, on the 22nd of March 1902, in the Launceston Examiner, it outlined that the inquest was held and a verdict was returned that his death was due to disease of the heart. Clyde was only 5 when his father passed away. Clyde Whittle served in World War I and joined up in 1915 at the age of 18. He did admit at his station papers that he'd been in trouble at the Claremont training camp. It says that he had been discharged due to misconduct. In 1916, he was court-martialed on 2 accounts. The first one, when on active service, drunkenness, which he pled guilty and was found guilty. And the second count was striking his superior officer, being in the execution of his office. He pleaded not guilty, but he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 90 days, which was commuted. 12 months later, after weeks of hearing nothing from her son, Catherine Whittle received a strange letter from England. Holy Cross Church, Beaumont Road, Plymouth, in England, 28th of October 1917. Dear Mrs. Whittle, I have met your son Clyde, and in brackets Roy, frequently during the past few weeks. I expect he will be stationed in this locality for some time, and am certain we will become even greater friends. He is sorry he has been unable to write to you recently, and not knowing when he will get the next opportunity, he asked me to drop you a line and let you know that he is in the best of health and perfectly happy, and he asked me also to wish you all at home a very happy Christmas in case he should not have a chance to write to you before that time. Sincerely yours, James M. Cashman, Catholic priest. And this was certified by Colonel Clark in Hobart on the 9th of January 1918. The truth was that Private Whittle was at Wandsworth Jail and was court-martialed at Plymouth for stealing from a fellow soldier and using insulting language to his senior officer, and he was sentenced to 9 months hard labour. Father Cashman was rather diplomatic and spared his widowed mother the truth. On the 20th of July 1918, in the Northern Minor of Charters Towers in Queensland, it says there have been several cases of Australian soldiers in the police courts, wearing the uniform of a captain, Thomas Clyde Whittle, a gunner, in the Australian Battery, pled guilty and was sentenced to 6 months hard labour at North London for defrauding Highbury tradesmen by tendering Bank of Engraving notes in payment for goods. A detective stated the prisoner was no doubt connected with a gang who had been passing these notes all over London. The prisoner said himself was duped with one of the notes, and the only way he could get his money back was to pass it on to unsuspecting people. He also gave the police the name and address of a man who had sold those notes to him at 5 shillings each. His mother Catherine died 10 days after peace was declared. 3 of her sons, including Clyde, were still overseas, serving in the war. And her death notice reads, the 21st of November 1918, at her late residence in Harrington Street, Catherine, the relict of the late Henry Whittle and mother of the late Sergeant Whittle AIF, also beloved mother of Sergeant John Whittle, VC, DCM, and eldest daughter of the late Bridget and Michael Sullivan of McRoby's Gully, leaving 3 daughters and 6 sons, 3 of whom are on OAS AIF to mourn their loss. May she rest in peace. Meanwhile, Private Whittle was undergoing a civil trial in London for inflicting gross personal violence on prison officers at Wandsworth. After serving another 9 months hard labour, he was sent home aboard the troop ship Suvic. He was dishonourably discharged on the 9th of November 1919. One of his long-suffering siblings inquired about her brother's war medals on his behalf and was notified that he would not be receiving any. On the 2nd of March 1922, in his war record, it states, automatically forfeits non-eligible war medals. Within a few weeks of arriving back in Australia, he left Australia again. In 1921, the Whittle family of Hobart received quite a shock when the following letter appeared in their local newspaper. To the editor of the Mercury, Sir, I ask you to publish the death of Thomas Clyde Whittle, who lost his life in a gambling hall at Durango, Mexico. He was working for me and went over into Mexico. As I do not know of any relations to write to, I request you publish my letter so that his folks will know of his death. He met his death at the hands of a gambler whom he caught cheating at cards, and he was quicker on the draw than Whittle. But his friends strung up the gambler, and his friends send their deepest sympathy to his relations, whoever they may be. Yours, etc., Fred C. Moore, foreman of the Bass Valley Cow Company, Walnut Wells, New Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico, 13th of May 1921. This story was picked up by papers around the country, particularly because of his older brother John being a very well-known Victoria Cross awardee. Then there was another announcement. Sergeant J. Whittle, VC of Hobart, was recently advised of the death in Mexico of his youngest brother, Thomas Clyde Whittle. The deceased saw active service in the AIF and after returning to Hobart only remained a month and went to America. In early January the following year, the whole story was revealed to be a fraud, perpetrated by Clyde himself. His relatives sent frantic inquiries to the US. Police were unable to trace a person called Fred Moore, nor could they locate the address on the letter. Apparently, the Bass Valley Cow Company was a creation of Clyde Whittle's. And why did he carry out this cruel hoax? Well, it was a distraction to cover the fact that he'd been in a Californian jail charged with burglary. And on the 6th of January 1922 in the Sydney Sun, at Hobart, about 6 months ago, a letter was received in Hobart signed Fred C. Moore, notifying the death of Thomas Clyde Whittle, a Tasmanian, in a gambling hall at Durango, Mexico. The letter stated that Mr. Whittle met his death at the hands of a gambler who he caught cheating at cards. Whittle's relatives made inquiries through the police who could not trace Moore or the place of his address. It proved to be a cruel hoax, as relatives yesterday received a letter from Thomas Whittle, written from Fort George, Washington, USA, proving he was alive and well. In the letter, Whittle upbraids his people for not writing to him and says that he may be coming home in a few weeks. Whittle is in the American Army and is a brother of Sergeant J. Whittle, the Tasmanian VC. So the real reason that he was returning home was that he had no option. He'd been deported after serving only 12 months of a 4-year sentence. For Clyde Whittle, his criminal career continued both in Tasmania and New South Wales. Thomas married Olga Esther Maggie Parker, known as Irene or May, in 1927 in Sydney. Olga was 13 years younger than Thomas. He was 30 and Olga only 17 when they married. The only issue was that Olga had already married in November 1925 in Tasmania. In a declaration, it says that Stanley Ernest Frederick Franklin of Hobart sincerely declares that being about to contract marriage with Olga Parker of Hobart, that there is no impediment or alliance or any other lawful hindrance to this marriage, and that I, Stanley Ernest Frederick Franklin, not leaving a widower, and am above the age of 21 years, and that Olga Parker is not a widow and is under the age of 21 years, but has written consent from her guardian, whose consent to the marriage is by law required and has been duly obtained. Olga Irene Parker was actually only 15 years old at the time that this documentation was filled out. Olga had a daughter, Lucy May Franklin, on the 18th of April 1927 in Hobart. This was only a month before her marriage to Clyde Whittle in Sydney. This daughter, Lucy, married Clyde Rowe, known as Clive, in Waverley, New South Wales in 1942 when she was only 15, and they adopted a son, Dan, in 1963, who was in fact Lucy's half-sister's Yvonne's child.
and Lucy died on the 4th of January 2007 in Walgett, New South Wales, aged 79. In the Brisbane Courier, on the 21st of May 1928, it says, Whittle, information is required regarding the children of Charles Thomas Whittle and Minnie Whittle, late of Newtown near Sydney, last heard of in Queensland, and that was from Jones & Jones Solicitors of Sydney. Olga had a son in March 1929 called Claude Irons Franklin, known as Chris, and he died on the 20th of June 1993 at Collarendabury in New South Wales. On the 27th of June 1928, so 9 months prior to the birth of this child, in the New South Wales Police Gazette, Thomas Charles Whittle, alias Thomas Clyde Whittle, alias O'Shea, alias Holland, charged on warrant with stealing jewellery to the value of £8, the property of John Joshua Glover, and has been arrested by Sydney Police on information supplied by Constables Fortius and Bagnall of the Robertson Police. Fined £10 in default of 3 months hard labour, ordered to pay £8 in compensation, and in default 2 months hard labour cumulative. Further charged with stealing household effects and a Singer sewing machine, valued at £84 part recovered, the property of Roy Bosley, and with obtaining the sum of £12, the property of Mabel Burnham by false pretences, committed for trial on both charges at the Goulburn Sessions. 3 days later, on the 30th of June 1928, in the Sydney Morning Herald, Thomas Clyde Whittle, 30, engineer, pleaded guilty to obtaining £12 from Mabel Burnham at Robertson on the 21st of April by falsely pretending that a sewing machine was then the property of a tailor who was going to England and that he'd been authorised to sell it. Also was stealing 2 mattresses and other goods, the property of Roy Beasley at Robertson on the 19th of May. It was stated that the prisoner had been convicted in England, America and Australia, and he was sentenced to 2 years hard labour on each charge concurrent. So with him being jailed in June 1928, there is a possibility that Olga conceived Claude Franklin in that time to have him born in March 29. On the 10th of July 1928, in the Bowral Southern Mail, crook at Robertson, Wiley Whittle sent to jail for 2 years. Some weeks ago, reference was made in the Mail to the doings of a man named Whittle and his wife in a boarding house at Robertson. Last week, according to a Sydney report, Whittle was arraigned at Darlinghurst upon charges arising from his actions in Robertson, when the real character and the identity of Thomas Clyde Whittle, alias O'Shea, alias Holland, were disclosed, and it was said that though a native of Tasmania, he possessed the doubtful distinction of being an intercontinental crook. Convictions of theft had been recorded against him in England, in addition to a bad military record, and after serving 2 sentences in a Californian penitentiary, he was deported to Australia, arriving in Sydney on board the Sonoma late in 1926. Whittle was convicted of burglary in the 2nd degree in California, and the prison board fixed the indeterminate sentence passed upon him at 4 years, of which he only served 1 year prior to being deported to Australia. Various articles, including household furniture and cutlery, which he had secured for the boarding house, were criminally dealt with by him, and as a result he was sentenced last week to 2 years' imprisonment on charges of false pretences and theft. His statement at the trial almost persuaded the trial judge that he had wrongfully pled guilty, but when the judge directed that his case go for trial, Whittle changed his tactics and pled guilty. He blamed the navvies for his trouble and alleged that they got drunk instead of paying their board. But the truth is that they had assisted him by paying in advance, and when he did a moonlight flit, he owed several of them money. A pathetic touch was introduced when Whittle endeavoured to have the judge read a letter which he had induced his 18-year-old wife, who was in a delicate state of health, to write to him. The judge, however, refused, saying that a man of his type had no right to marry the girl. Whittle also said that he and his wife had walked 100 miles from Sydney to Robertson in search of work. Still another plea advanced by Whittle to support his request for another chance was that he had a patent on the market which was likely to be successful. He is an engineer by calling, however the world will have to wait at least 2 years before his patent is disclosed. And an article titled Unclaimed Money, Next of Kin Wanted. The following persons are being sought for to claim money or property or for something to their advantage. In every case, the beneficiaries named or their next of kin are known to have emigrated or at last heard of in Australia or New Zealand. Readers thinking themselves interested can obtain further particulars by communicating with Lloyd's Unclaimed Money officers in Melbourne, Charles Thomas Whittle and Minnie Whittle, late of Queensland, formerly of Newtown, New South Wales. So it seems that Olga returned to her husband in Tasmania while Clyde Whittle was in jail. A year later, on the 3rd of July 1929, in the Launceston Examiner, a serious charge, the second trial in Hobart. At the last sitting of the criminal court before Mr Justice Clark, Joseph Finn was convicted on a charge of rape against Olga Irene Franklin at her home on the Huon Road between Ferntree and Longley on the 4th of May. The accused was convicted and sentenced to 12 years' imprisonment. An appeal against the sentence was later heard by the full court and was upheld on the grounds that Finn's plea of guilty was qualified by his statement that the girl was a consenting party and therefore it was equivalent to a plea of not guilty. A new trial was ordered. Olga Franklin stated that on the 4th of May the accused called at her house with a bottle of wine, some of which her brother-in-law, Morris Franklin, and the accused drank. The witness had about a teaspoonful. Finn went away and returned later. Witness went to bed at 9:30 p.m. and was awoken at midnight. The accused was in the bed, but she thought it was her husband until the accused spoke. She struggled and pushed him away and sprang out of bed. She was too terrified to cry out, but went to her brother-in-law's room. When she obtained a light, she saw the accused at the edge of her bed. Her husband returned at 2 o'clock in the morning, but she was too upset to tell him what had happened. She told him the accused had been in the house, and on the following morning she told him what happened. Morris Franklin said on May the 4th the accused called at her brother's house and that he and Finn had a drink of wine. Afterwards he took the accused to his home about 1.25 miles away. He left him there and returned home to his brother's place. Sometime after midnight his sister-in-law came into his room and her cries awoke him. She told him that Finn was in her bedroom, but she was too terrified to do anything. His Honour said, "Why, you are 19 years of age." She said, "Yes, but alongside of me he is big and he says he is frightened of nobody." Witness continuing said that on the 5th of May, he and his brother went to Finn's hut and later asked him what he was going to do about the affair the previous night. The accused said he did not know, but later when they met Finn again, he said to his brother, "Say, mate, you don't want to tell the world about it." Detective Smith stated that he had interviewed Mrs. Franklin, read a statement made by her to him, which supported the evidence she'd given. She stated that when the accused went to the house, he was under the influence of liquor and smelt strongly of drink when she awoke and found him with her. The statement was read to the accused and he admitted it was true. When the witness and Constable Males were taking Finn to Kingston, the accused made a statement which incriminated him. For the defence, accused stated that he had not had much education and he'd earned his living from an early age. He'd known the Franklin family for 6 months and had been made welcome in their home. He'd been invited to the house that night by the husband, Stanley Franklin, but when he got there, Franklin was not at home. He and Morris Franklin went to his hut and had supper. He lay down and went to sleep, and when he awoke, Morris Franklin had gone away. He then walked to Franklin's house and asked if Stanley Franklin had returned home. When the witness said, "Mate, you don't want to tell the world about it," Franklin replied, "That will be all right, mate." In cross-examination, Finn said that he was sober when he made his statement to the police, but the statement made by them, apart from the signed statement, was not true. On the 3rd of July 1929, in the Hobart Mercury, the case reheard, evidence for the defence. The criminal court yesterday heard the case in which Joseph Finn, labourer, aged 53, appealed against the sentence of 12 years imprisonment passed upon him by Mr Justice Clark at the previous sitting of the court. The accused at the conclusion of the previous trial, having been asked why sentence should not be passed upon him, claiming that the woman was a consenting party, thereby varying his original plea of guilty. Olga Irene Franklin, married woman who gave her age as nearly 19, said she had 2 children, the youngest was 5 weeks old. At 12 o'clock she was awakened by the accused, who was committing an offence. She struggled and the accused said, "Never mind, duck." She succeeded in getting free and made her way to her brother-in-law's room. The accused followed when he had dressed himself, and his only remark was, "Stan," that is the witness's husband, "is not home yet." He then proceeded to the kitchen where he helped himself to a drink and went away. At 2 a.m. her husband returned. Witness at the time was in a weak state of health, having only a fortnight before returned from hospital after the birth of her youngest child. The witness denied that she was in any way a consenting party to what occurred. Cross-examined, the witness said she'd been married for nearly 4 years, being 15 and a half years old at the time. She'd been 18 months resident in the district and within that time had lived in 3 separate places. One of them, Finn, had been a frequent visitor, having worked at the time with the witness's husband. On the day of the alleged offence, the accused and witness's husband were in town together. The accused had been previously invited by her husband to come to the house that evening, and on arrival had inquired whether the latter had got back. When the bottle of wine brought by the accused was opened, the witness had a sip for sociability, but threw away most of the contents of her cup. The accused put his finger to his lips and said, "Don't let on." Witness, to avoid any possibility of a fight and to prevent her children being awakened, and particularly to save her baby from being hurt, discouraged her brother-in-law from taking any action. In the morning, she told her husband everything and he went to see the accused. Before leaving the house after committing the offence, the accused remained in the house for the best part of half an hour smoking, while she remained in her brother-in-law's room. The husband, Stanley Frederick Franklin, said that on returning home he found the doors locked contrary to practice ever since he and his wife had been married. His brother let him in and he went straight to his wife, who was crying so bitterly that she could not speak for a long time, ultimately simply telling him that the accused had been there. In the morning, his wife, who was still badly broken down, gave him to understand what had occurred. The witness, accompanied by his brother, went straight to the accused's hut and asked him what he was going to do. The accused replied, "I don't know." Witness said, "Well, I do." With his brother, the witness went to the public telephone, where his brother rang the police. He explained that he missed the bus and did not leave town until 1 a.m. He'd been previously on friendly terms with the accused, the two having at one time done bush-cutting work together. The Solicitor General stated that the Crown's case was overwhelmingly proved. So Clyde Whittle was released from Parramatta Jail on the 19th of February 1930. His jail record states he was born in Tasmania. He was a mechanic and born in 1897. He was 5'11" and a half, and that the expiration date originally for his release was the 28th of June 1930. So he was released on remission. And in the mugshot pictures of Clyde Whittle on the 16th of July 1930 says Thomas Clyde Whittle, also known as Thomas Charles Whittle, Clyde Whittle and Thomas O'Shea, dark complexion, black hair, brown eyes, clasped hands and flowers tattooed on the outer side of the right forearm. On the 29th of June 1928 at the Sydney Court of Sessions was sentenced to 2 years hard labour concurrent on charges of false pretences and larceny. Released on licence on the 19th of February 1930 with term expired, previously convicted in America on charges of burglary and at the Central Police Court and Robertson Police Court on charges of fraudulent conversion and stealing. His modus operandi: shop and housebreaker, sneak thief and petty larcenist, forces the rear doors of shops and windows of dwelling houses with a jemmy to gain entry, steals jewellery and clothing and disposes it at pawn offices, obtains the use of motor cars by false representation, an agile and cunning thief, and addicted to drink. On the 22nd of May 1931 in the Launceston Examiner, Thomas Clyde Whittle, who appeared before the police magistrate today on a charge of the 7th of May stealing a letter containing a cheque for £12, the property of the Postmaster General, was remanded until the 29th of May, bail being allowed in a surety of £50 and a personal bond for a similar amount. A week later, in Hobart, Thomas Clyde Whittle, charged at the City Court today by obtaining £4 by false representation from Clyde Horace Hall, was said by Hall to have suggested that a motor be put into Hall's invalid chair. Hall gave Whittle the £4 but did not get the motor. The magistrate said the case was so much on the borderline that it would be not safe to convict. And a year later, in the Launceston Examiner, arrest at Hamilton. Thomas Clyde Whittle was arrested at Hamilton on Saturday by Inspector Tonkinson of New Norfolk and charged with having stolen a horse, a jinker and a harness, the property of F.J. Peters of Launceston. He was taken to New Norfolk and later appeared and charged with the offence and was remanded in the Hobart Police Court. And 2 days later, Thomas Clyde Whittle, a man with a police record in London, California and Sydney, was sentenced to imprisonment for 3 months. In the police court this morning, he pled guilty to a charge of having stolen a horse, jinker and harness. On the 11th of January 1934, Yvonne Catherine Olga Whittle was born in Carlton, Victoria. So it seems at this point that Olga has returned to Clyde Whittle. She had a son, Danny Rowe, in 1963, who was adopted out and was brought up by her half-sister, as mentioned before. Yvonne married Alfred Uriah Gilbert in Coonaball, New South Wales in 1965, when she was 31, and they had 4 boys together. In 1980, they lived at Goulburn, New South Wales, and Yvonne died on the 1st of August 2005 in Lightning Ridge, aged 71. On the 3rd of March 1934 in the Melbourne Australian, in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, matrimonial causes jurisdiction between May Whittle, also known as Mary Whittle, petitioner, and Thomas Clyde Whittle, late of Carlton, near Melbourne in the state of Victoria. Take notice that May Whittle has commenced a suit against you in the court for a dissolution of marriage on the grounds of desertion for 3 years and upwards, without just cause or excuse. You are required to enter an appearance to this suit in the proper office of the court before the 22nd day of February 1934, and in the event of you not doing so, within the time limited, the petitioner will proceed and the suit be heard and determined, your absence notwithstanding. On the 21st of May 1938 in the Charters Towers Northern Miner in Queensland, something new, your radio and electrical problems. Thomas Whittle, late of B&R Radio Company Sydney, has commenced business next to the Prince of Wales Hotel and is a radio and motor ignition expert. He will make, repair or buy radio sets, do armature rewinding and all general electrical repairs. Nothing too small, nothing too large, Sydney prices. On the 30th of January 1939 in the Daily Mercury at Mackay, Queensland, Thomas Charles Whittle, aged 40, was charged with having obtained £13 from Frederick Lonsdale Morkan of Townsville by falsely pretending to him that he was about to commence in business as a boot repairer in Flinders Street, Townsville, and for the payment of which sum Morkan was to have as a half share in the business. The defendant was asked for a remand until Wednesday next, as he would then plead guilty, and his request was granted. And a few days later, on the 2nd of February 1939, in the Mackay Daily Mercury, Thomas Charles Whittle, 40, on remand was charged with having obtained £13 from Frederick Lonsdale Morkan of Townsville. When the case was called yesterday morning, Sergeant O'Connor applied for remand. When the defendant appeared in the afternoon, 2 further charges were preferred against him. One on the 15th of January 1939 at Townsville by falsely pretending to Leslie Thompson that a kitchen cabinet and an ice chest were his property and not encumbered, and he obtained £4, 7 shillings and 6 from Thompson with intent to defraud. And between September the 9th, 1938 and January the 19th, 1939, at Townsville, he stole a Page bicycle valued at £5, 15 shillings, the property of Page Cycle and Motor Company Limited. The defendant entered a plea of guilty to each charge. In relative to the first charge, Sergeant O'Connor said as a result of an advertisement in the Townsville Bulletin, Morkan had an interview with the defendant who said he intended to start a boot repairing business. Certain transactions followed, and Morkan lent the defendant £13. Later, the defendant was located in Mackay by Sergeant Curry. Regarding the cabinet and ice chests, the defendant sold these to Thompson for £4, 7 shillings and 6, stating they were his property, but it was ascertained the articles were obtained on a hire purchase agreement which had not been fulfilled. In connection with the bicycle, the defendant purchased this on terms, paid a £1 deposit and did not meet further commitments. Sergeant O'Connor intimated that the defendant had a record. For the defendant, Mr. Lee said that he expended £10 of the £13 in the purchase of tools and necessary equipment for commencing a boot repairing business which had started. The amounts involved in the charges were not excessive, and Mr. Lee added that the defendant received no benefit from the disposal of the bicycle. Mr. Lee said most of the offences contained in the record against the defendant were committed while defendant was on active service. He was a native of Tasmania and enlisted at 16. The offences were acts of youthful indiscretion more than criminal intent. A considerable time had elapsed since the defendant had been in trouble. He was a married man with a wife and 4 children, the eldest being 12 and the youngest 8 months. One child of 5 years had been admitted to hospital. Mr. Lee said the amount of £10 was available immediately for restitution. He asked for that to be taken into consideration with the fact that the defendant was married with a wife and 4 young children to support, and if a fine was imposed, payment could be made in 30 days. His Honour said he could not understand why people answered advertisements such as the one referred to. The offers were so ridiculous that no one should believe that gain should be derived. Still, he had to be fair to the public to protect them against a man of the defendant's type. Mr. Lee mentioned that the defendant had arranged for a lease of 2 acres with the object of starting a market garden there. His Honour said he did not know whether Mackay would be better off by having the defendant here. Mackay would certainly be no worse off by not having him. There was no room for men like him here, whether married or single, and the defendant was sentenced to imprisonment for 3 months on each charge, the sentences to be concurrent. 4 years later is in the census under Thomas Clyde Whittle, living in Glen Davis near Robertson as a turner and fitter, and his wife Olga Irene Whittle is listed as well. Stanley Franklin petitioned for a divorce from Olga in late 1944 in Tasmania. On the 28th of October 1944 in the Burnie Advocate. In the Supreme Court of Tasmania, divorce to Olga Irene Franklin, formerly of Newtown in Tasmania, last heard of at Pondville in Tasmania. Take notice that a petition has been filed in this court, endorsed with a notice to you to appear and answer the charges in the petition of Stanley Innes Frederick Franklin of Allendale in Tasmania, praying for a dissolution of marriage. In default of you appearing, you will not be allowed to address the court, and the court will proceed to hear the said petition proved and pronounce judgment in respect, and take further notice that for the purpose within 8 days after the date of this publication, an appearance must be entered into at the Registry of the Supreme Court of Tasmania in Hobart. And on the 30th of January 1945 in the Hobart Mercury. On the grounds of desertion, Stanley Innes Frederick Franklin of Allendale, Wood Carter, petitioned for a divorce from Olga Irene Franklin, of address unknown to the petitioner. The marriage was at Hobart in 1925. Franklin said that in 1930, when they were at Longley, his wife and 2 children went to Pondville. He got a car and brought her back. In 1931, in Hobart, his wife left again without the children. He followed her and attempted to persuade her to come back. She said she wished to go out of his life forever. He had not seen her since and had been unable to trace her, and he now wished to marry again. A decree was withheld pending a full court decision in another case. And it took until October, so the 11th of October 1945, in the Launceston Examiner, it announced that the following decrees were absolute: Stanley Innes Frederick Franklin versus Olga Irene Franklin. So it seems that Stanley Franklin had no idea that Olga had been married to Clyde Whittle. Janice Maria Whittle was born on the 19th of March 1947 in Claremont, Queensland. She married Latouf Dredge in 1974 and had 3 children, Thomas, George and Alexandra, and Janice died on the 9th of July 2023 in Westmead, New South Wales. There was also a son who died in 2021. He was under the name of Peter Franklin, so I'm not sure of his birth date and whether he was in fact Stanley Franklin's child or Clyde Whittle's child. In 1949, Thomas Clyde Whittle is living at Hut E12 at Wacol in Queensland, and his occupation is a fitter, and Olga Irene is listed under Olga Irene Whittle at the same address. And Olga died at Pascoe Vale, Victoria in 1954, aged only 43. Thomas died under the name of Thomas Charles Whittle, and he died on the 6th of November 1976 in Sydney. His gravestone states that he was the father of Janice and the grandfather of Thomas Dredge. So it seems that Clyde Whittle certainly led a life very different to his war hero brother who had obtained a VC.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.